You've been told you're a lot. Too quiet, too intense, too in your head, too sensitive, too serious, too particular about things that other people seem to let go of without a second thought. You ask questions people find exhausting. You notice things nobody else seems to notice. You spend more time thinking about a conversation that happened 3 days ago than most people spend thinking about anything at all. And somewhere along the way, probably early, probably more than once, someone made you feel like all of that was a problem. It wasn't a problem. It was a signal. Here's what I want you to understand before we go any further. The traits that made you feel out of place, the ones that got you labeled as weird or odd or difficult or too much, those traits have a name. And the name isn't a disorder. It isn't a flaw. It isn't something to be managed or medicated or apologized for. The name is intelligence. Specifically, a particular kind of intelligence that doesn't show up well on standardized tests or in noisy social settings or in systems designed for the average. It shows up in how you think, how you observe, how you feel, how you process the world at a depth that most people simply don't go to. Today we're going through 10 of those traits, specifically, in detail, not as a feel-good list, as a genuine framework for understanding why your brain works the way it does and why that's not a bug. It never was. And the first one? It's probably the reason you clicked on this in the first place. Number 1. Curiosity and the love of learning. You don't just want to know things, you want to know why things are the way they are, and then why that is, and then what the implications of that are for something completely unrelated that your brain somehow connected it to at 2 in the morning. Most people learn what they need to learn. You learn what you can't stop yourself from learning. There's a difference. It's not discipline. It's wiring. Psychologist Todd Kostin has spent years researching curiosity and consistently finds the same thing. Curiosity isn't just a personality trait, it's a cognitive drive, a neurological pull toward novelty and complexity that highly intelligent people experience more intensely and more frequently than average. The curious brain doesn't settle into comfortable ignorance. It treats unanswered questions as genuinely uncomfortable, something to be resolved, not tolerated. Think about the last time you went down a rabbit hole, started reading about one thing, followed a link, followed another, emerged 2 hours later knowing more about the migration patterns of a specific bird species than you ever intended to, and somehow feel like that time was well spent. That's not distraction. That's your intelligence looking for connections, building the kind of cross-domain knowledge base that produces creative insight, problem-solving ability, and the capacity to see things other people miss entirely. The people who told you to focus, who found your curiosity exhausting or unfocused, were operating inside a system that rewards narrow expertise. You were building something different, something broader, something that looks inefficient from the outside and feels essential from the inside. The most innovative thinkers across every field share one characteristic more reliably than any other. Not IQ scores, not formal education. Curiosity. Sustained, voracious, undisciplined curiosity that refuses to stay inside the lane it was assigned. Number 2. Preference for solitude and deep thinking. You recharge alone, not because people drain you personally, though sometimes they do, but because your mind needs silence the way a musician needs quiet to hear the composition forming. Here's what most people misunderstand about your preference for solitude. They read it as antisocial, as shyness, as social anxiety, as something to be fixed. What they're actually observing is a mind that processes at a depth that requires bandwidth, and social environments are bandwidth expensive. Research from the London School of Economics, specifically a study by Satoshi Kanazawa and Norman Lee, found something counterintuitive about highly intelligent people in social interaction. Where most people report higher life satisfaction with more frequent social contact, highly intelligent individuals reported the opposite. More frequent socialization was associated with lower satisfaction, more time alone with higher. The explanation isn't that intelligent people dislike people, it's that they're oriented toward long-range goals and complex internal work that social interaction, however enjoyable, interrupts. The mind doing serious thinking needs uninterrupted time, and highly intelligent people feel that need more acutely than most. Your best thinking has never happened in a crowd. It's happened at 11 p.m. in a quiet room with no notifications and no demands, in the shower, on a walk alone, in that specific state of focused solitude where your brain finally has enough space to do what it actually does best. That's not isolation, that's your intelligence at work. Number 3. Unconventional routines. You don't work like other people. Your productive hours are wrong by most standards. Your workspace looks chaotic to outsiders and completely organized to you. Your process for getting things done makes no sense to anyone watching and produces results that make no sense to anyone who didn't see the process. The night owl tendency specifically is worth addressing directly because it's one of the most consistently misunderstood patterns in highly intelligent people and one of the most consistently punished by systems designed around the average. Research published in Psychology Today and replicated across multiple studies has found a consistent correlation between higher cognitive ability and preference for evening and nighttime hours. The proposed mechanism involves the prefrontal cortex, the brain's seat of complex reasoning and abstract thought, remaining more active later in the day in people whose overall cognitive engagement is higher. Simply put, the more your brain does, the later it wants to do it. And it's not just sleep schedules, it's the whole architecture of how you approach tasks. You hyper-focus on things that matter to you, to a degree that looks unhealthy from the outside but produces extraordinary output. You ignore things that don't engage your interest, to a degree that looks like laziness but is actually your brain's efficient allocation of limited attention to what it finds genuinely worth processing. You weren't built for the 9 to 5, not because you're undisciplined, but because your brain's peak performance window, processing style, and attention architecture don't map onto a schedule designed for average cognitive functioning. That's not a flaw in you, that's a flaw in the schedule. Say this with me. My process doesn't have to look normal to produce something extraordinary. But here's where it gets more uncomfortable, because the next trait, the one that's probably caused you the most distress, is also the one most consistently misread as a problem. Number 4. Deep introspection and overthinking. You've been told you think too much. Probably by people who don't think enough, though that's not entirely fair, and I'll come back to that. Here's what actually happens in your head. A situation occurs. Most people process it, file it, move on. Your brain doesn't do that. It runs the situation forward. What are the implications? What did that mean? What should I have said? What does this pattern suggest about the future? What am I missing? What would a smarter version of me have noticed? That's not anxiety. That's not neurosis. That's a highly active default mode network, the part of your brain responsible for self-reflection, future planning, and theory of mind running at higher than average intensity. Neuroscientists have found that people who score higher on measures of intelligence show greater activity in the default mode network, particularly during rest and reflection. The problem isn't the introspection. The problem is what happens when introspection doesn't have a productive outlet. When the same analytical power that could solve complex problems gets turned inward without direction, it produces rumination. The same engine, different fuel, running in circles instead of forward. The solution isn't to think less, it's to direct the thinking. Journal, build, create, analyze something external. Give that engine something to actually work on and watch what it produces when it has a worthy problem instead of an empty loop. The most self-aware people in any room are almost always among the most introspective. And self-awareness, the genuine, uncomfortable, unflinching kind, is one of the rarest and most valuable cognitive capacities a human being can develop. Number 5. Strong pattern recognition and observation skills. You notice things. That's the simplest way to say it. You notice things that other people walk past without registering. The shift in someone's tone that tells you something's wrong before they've said a word. The inconsistency in a story that everyone else accepted without question. The connection between two things that seemed completely unrelated until you see the thread linking them. The pattern in a sequence of events that tells you where it's heading before it gets there. This is one of the most reliably documented markers of high intelligence across research literature. Pattern recognition, the ability to identify structure, regularity, and relationship in complex information, is so strongly correlated with general cognitive ability that it forms the basis of most standardized intelligence assessments. The famous Raven's progressive matrices test is essentially a pure pattern recognition task, and it predicts cognitive ability better than almost any other single measure. But here's what the tests don't measure: the social pattern recognition, the environmental awareness, the ability to walk into a room and read the dynamics: who has power, who's performing, who's in pain, what's not being said, faster and more accurately than most people could articulate if they tried. That ability, the one that makes you the person who always seems to know what's really going on, isn't intuition in the mystical sense. It's high-speed pattern recognition running on a massive dataset of observed human behavior. Your brain has been collecting data your entire life, and it processes that data faster than you can consciously explain the conclusions it reaches. When you get a feeling about someone and can't explain why, and you turn out to be right, that's not magic. That's your pattern recognition engine delivering a verdict before the conscious mind has finished reviewing the evidence. Repeat after me. What I notice isn't nothing, it's data. But here's where it gets more complex, because the next sign, the one about how you communicate, is one that's been profoundly misread your entire life. Number 6. Thoughtful communication and listening habits. You've been told you're too quiet in conversations, that you don't contribute enough, that you seem distant or disengaged, that you need to speak up more. Stop. Here's what's actually happening. While everyone else is talking, you're listening, really listening, not waiting for your turn to speak, but actually processing what's being said, evaluating it, connecting it to what you already know, forming a response that actually engages with what was said rather than what you planned to say before the other person finished. That pause before you speak, the one people read as uncertainty or slowness, is your brain doing something most people's brains don't do. It's checking. Is this accurate? Is this the right framing? Is there a better way to say this that actually communicates what I mean rather than an approximation of it? That pause is quality control, and the output is almost always better for it. Research on communication and cognitive ability consistently finds that higher intelligence correlates with listening more and speaking more precisely, not more frequently. The highly intelligent communicator tends to say less but mean more. Every word is load-bearing. Filler is uncomfortable. Vagueness is physically irritating. Here's the contradiction. The people who filled every silence with noise, who always had something to say, who never seemed to need a moment to think, they got called confident, engaging, social. And you, the one actually processing the conversation at depth, got called quiet, reserved, hard to read. The social reward system is calibrated for volume, not depth. And if you've spent your life being penalized for depth over volume, that's not a reflection of your communication ability. That's a reflection of what most social environments are actually measuring. You were never bad at conversation. You were bad at performing conversation for audiences that couldn't tell the difference. Number 7. Questioning norms and analytical thinking. You've never been good at accepting things just because that's how they've always been done. This has gotten you in trouble, in school, at work, in relationships, everywhere that systems run on compliance and authority rather than reason and evidence. And you've probably been told more times than you can count that you're difficult, contrarian, that you think you're smarter than everyone, that you need to learn to just go along with things. Stop. The capacity to question what everyone else accepts is not arrogance. It is one of the most cognitively demanding things a human brain can do. Here's why. Accepting the norm requires almost no cognitive effort. The norm is pre-packaged, pre-validated, socially reinforced. Your brain can accept it on autopilot, and most brains do. Questioning the norm requires generating an alternative framework, evaluating the evidence for both, tolerating the social discomfort of disagreement, and maintaining your position under pressure from people who find the questioning itself threatening. That process, the one your brain does automatically, the one that feels so natural you can't turn it off, is cognitively expensive. Most brains conserve energy by not doing it. Yours can't seem to stop. The history of any meaningful human advancement is a history of someone asking why we do it this way and refusing to accept "because we always have" as a sufficient answer. Not because they were rebels for its own sake, because their brains genuinely couldn't rest inside an explanation that didn't hold up. You were built for that. The discomfort you felt in systems that demanded compliance without reason, that wasn't you failing to adapt. That was your brain refusing to pretend that insufficient explanations are good enough. And it shouldn't. Number 8. Emotional sensitivity and empathy. Here's the one that surprises people most. Because we have this cultural image of intelligence as cold, analytical, detached, the person who's good with numbers and bad with feelings. Stop. That's a stereotype, and it's cost a lot of intelligent people years of believing something false about themselves. Research on emotional intelligence and cognitive ability tells a more complex story. High intelligence, particularly the kind characterized by deep processing, pattern recognition, and strong observational skills, tends to produce heightened emotional sensitivity, not reduced sensitivity. Because the same brain that processes information deeply processes emotional information deeply too. You feel things more than most people, not because you're weak, because you're perceptive. You pick up on emotional undercurrents that most people miss entirely. You feel the tension in a room. You feel the unspoken pain in someone's casual comment. You feel the weight of things that most people move past without registering. And then, because you also overthink everything, you process those feelings longer, more thoroughly, more uncomfortably, until it looks like you're overreacting, until someone tells you you're too sensitive, when what's actually happening is that you perceive something real that they didn't perceive at all, and your response is proportional to what you actually picked up, not what they registered. Your emotional sensitivity isn't a contradiction of your intelligence, it's an expression of it. The same depth of processing, the same refusal to skim the surface, applied to human experience rather than abstract problems. And once you understand that, everything changes about how you see yourself. Number 9. Creative and abstract thinking. You think in pictures, in metaphors, in connections between things that have no business being connected, except that they are, and you can see exactly how, even when explaining it to someone else feels impossible. Abstract thinking, the ability to work with concepts, patterns, and relationships that aren't concrete or immediately observable, is one of the most robust markers of general intelligence in cognitive research. And creative thinking, the ability to generate novel combinations of existing ideas, relies on the same neural architecture. The highly creative mind and the highly analytical mind aren't opposites. At the highest levels, they're the same mind expressing itself differently depending on the problem. Here's what that looks like in practice. You solve problems by analogy. You understand something new by finding what it resembles. You explain complex ideas through stories and images because abstract to abstract translation feels clunky. You need a concrete bridge. You make lateral connections that feel obvious to you and bewildering to everyone else. That's not a communication problem. That's the way a brain that thinks in systems rather than sequences actually works. Systems thinkers don't move in straight lines. They move in webs, touching multiple points simultaneously, finding the relationships between them, building understanding from the structure rather than the sequence. The education system rewards sequential thinking. Follow the steps, show your work, get the right answer in the right order. Abstract, systems-level thinkers find this frustrating, not because they can't do it, but because it feels like being asked to drive somewhere by taking only left turns. You can see the destination. The prescribed route makes no sense. Number 10. Unique habits misunderstood as weird. Let's name some of them, because you've probably spent years wondering if anyone else does these things. You talk to yourself. Not because something is wrong with you, because externalizing your thinking helps you process it. Research on self-directed speech finds it improves cognitive performance, focus, and problem solving. You're not talking to yourself. You're thinking out loud. There's a difference. You have strong sensory preferences. Certain sounds are genuinely intolerable. Certain textures, certain lighting, certain environments produce a level of distraction that other people seem immune to. This is consistent with research on sensory processing sensitivity, a trait that appears at higher rates in people with greater depth of cognitive and emotional processing. Your nervous system picks up more signal, which means it also picks up more noise. You collect things nobody else finds interesting. Deep, specific knowledge about a subject that has no practical application, but that you find endlessly fascinating. You know more about this thing, whatever it is, than anyone you've ever met. And you got there not through discipline, but through the inability to stop learning once you started. You have intense reactions to injustice, not just personal injustice, systemic injustice, abstract injustice, injustice happening to people you've never met and never will. This connects directly to the empathy and pattern recognition we discussed earlier. You see the system producing the outcome. You feel the weight of the person experiencing it. And the combination is genuinely difficult to manage in a world that moves on quickly. You prefer a few deep relationships over many surface ones. The idea of small talk as the primary mode of human connection is genuinely exhausting to you. Not because you're antisocial, but because the depth you want from human interaction is rarely available at the surface level. You'd rather have one conversation that goes somewhere real than 12 that stay comfortable and shallow. None of these are weird. Every single one of them is a recognizable pattern in people who process the world at greater depth than average. You were surrounded by people operating at a different cognitive frequency, and the mismatch looked like a problem with you. It wasn't. What all 10 signs have in common. Pull back for a moment. Look at the full picture. Curiosity that can't be satisfied, a need for solitude to think properly, unconventional rhythms that don't fit standard schedules, introspection that runs deeper than comfort, pattern recognition that operates faster than explanation, communication that prioritizes precision over volume, a brain that questions what everyone else accepts, emotional sensitivity that picks up what others miss, abstract thinking that moves in webs rather than lines, habits that make perfect internal sense and look strange from the outside. What do all of these have in common? Depth. Every single one of them is a different expression of a mind that goes deeper than the surface, thinks longer, feels more, processes more thoroughly, connects more broadly. The world is largely built for the surface, for speed, for efficiency, for the kind of thinking that gets to good enough quickly and moves on. And if you've spent your life in that world feeling slightly out of sync, slightly too slow for fast conversations and too fast for slow systems, it's because you were never built for good enough. You were built for accurate, for thorough, for real. And those things take time. They take depth. They take exactly the kind of mind you've been apologizing for your entire life. Stop apologizing. Not because you're perfect, not because every expression of these traits has always served you well. Some of them have made your life genuinely harder in specific ways, and that's worth acknowledging honestly. But because the core of what you are, the depth, the curiosity, the sensitivity, the pattern recognition, the refusal to accept surfaces as sufficient, that core is not a problem. It's the thing. It's always been the thing. A note on what this isn't. I want to be clear about something before we close. This isn't a list designed to make you feel superior. Intelligence, in all its forms, is not a moral virtue. It doesn't make you better than people who process differently. It doesn't exempt you from the work of being a decent, humble, continuously learning human being. What it does do, what today was actually about, is give you a framework for understanding yourself that isn't built on what you're not. You've spent enough time being measured against a standard that was never designed with you in mind. That measurement was always going to come up wrong. This is a different measurement, one that actually fits. And if you've been carrying the weight of feeling fundamentally out of place in a world that seemed designed for everyone but you, I hope something in today's conversation let a little of that weight go. You were never too much. You were always just enough. in a world that kept asking you to be less. If this landed, if you recognized yourself in any of this, share it with someone who needs to hear it, because somewhere right now there's a person who's been told they're weird one too many times, and they need to know what that actually means. Like if this resonated, subscribe because there's more ahead, and it only gets more honest from here. The things that made you different were never the problem. They were always the point.